My name is Claire Rowan, 28, and the night my daughter decided to come, I stood on my own porch with snow freckles melting on my lashes and a contraction cinching me in half while the chain lock slid into place on the other side of my door. Evan, my husband, hovered behind the glass with his hand near the deadbolt like a man afraid of his own house. His mother, Lorraine Whitaker, leaned into the frame and said through the crack, "It's too early, Claire. Don't make a scene." The porch light haloed her pearls. My fingers shook on the railing. Another contraction ripped through me, and I tasted copper. Across the street, Mr. Parker's Ring doorbell glowed blue. I raised my phone and pressed 911 because the truth hit me as clean as the cold air. No one inside was going to help me. Sirens thinned the winter quiet. Lorraine told Evan to let the medics check from the porch. He didn't open the door. I caught the paramedics' eyes through the fence and motioned them around back, teeth chattering, while I fumbled the gate latch with numb hands. The EMTs shouldered through snow-dusted juniper and lifted me onto a gurney. The last thing I saw before the ambulance doors closed was Evan's shadow in our entryway, still not crossing the line between hallway warmth and the night I was bleeding into. When the doors shut, the sound was final, like a lock turning. I didn't know it then, but the next lock I heard would be one I turned myself. 3 months earlier, on a Sunday that smelled like pancakes and pine cleaner, Lorraine carried a tote of paint swatches into our townhouse as if she owned the deed. Evan kissed my cheek and told me she'd help with the nursery. He meant she'd choose it. She floated swatches like confetti navy, with little anchors a mauve I couldn't imagine waking up to. I had already taped a soft sage leaf to the wall. It looked like breathing room. Too drab, she said, smiling the way people smile at dogs that aren't trained yet. Stimulation matters. I tried to laugh it off and offered coffee. She accepted, then told the painter, whom she had already hired, that he could start Tuesday. Evan signed the work order without looking up from a text. He worked as a project manager at his family's construction firm, and lately every decision in our house seemed to be filed in a folder labeled Mom Knows Best. At dinner that night, Evan tapped the joint card for the bill, while Lorraine discussed preschools with waitlists that looked like hedge funds. The server refilled water. I watched the shine on my fork and said I'd like to keep my mother's rocking chair in Hazel's room. The chair was scuffed where a thumb in time had made a groove. Lorraine dabbed her mouth with linen and said, "Sentiment is lovely in a photo book." On the drive home, I cradled my belly and tried to make my voice even. "I want the chair. I need one thing that feels like mine." Evan glanced at the clock on the dash. "It'll clash with the built-ins. Mom can have a custom rocker delivered." He wasn't cruel. He was careful like a man who didn't want to step on cracks. We were both careful until the day the cracks widened and the care fell straight through. The next morning, I found pamphlets Lorraine had tucked into our mail slot. Whitaker Family Impact Fund announced an annual gala with glossy photos. Her note, neat and blue, "Dr. Abrams is expecting your transfer. He delivered all my grandchildren." I carried those pamphlets to the kitchen trash, then fished them back out because I was already learning to keep records. The thing about isolation in a neighborhood like ours is that it doesn't look like a locked room. It looks like drop-ins. Lorraine learned my schedule and appeared with help when Evan was at the office. She opened the fridge and suggested different yogurt. She rang contractors I had never met, sweeping a manicured finger over granite, speaking in allowances and timelines as if I were a temp waiting for a badge. When I said I felt good with my OB Dr. Patel, she smiled at my belly. "Sweetheart, Dr. Abrams has the best outcomes. He's on our board." She held my gaze a second longer than necessary, as if daring me to define best. At the Whitaker Sunday brunch, I held a glass of seltzer and tried not to breathe in the roast, while Lorraine cornered Evan near the buffet. "Claire seems emotional," she said, the way people discuss weather fronts. Evan looked at me across the room and lifted his shoulders in a helpless apology. That night, he slid into bed late and whispered that his mom meant well. He kissed the back of my neck, and for a moment, I remembered how it felt when want was the only plan. The next week, a bill from Whitaker Capital Credit Union landed on our doormat with both our names, but only one of us had primary authority. It wasn't sinister. It felt like a default someone had checked for us. I called the bank and heard my own voice become professional, the one I used at the clinic when families needed clarity. I asked for duplicates of statements. I asked to be added as full authority. The woman on the phone said she'd mail the form. I thanked her and wrote the date in a notebook, then photographed the notebook entry because paper can disappear. At night, I sat in the nursery that still smelled faintly of new carpet and traced the groove on my mother's rocker with my thumb. The house hummed. The baby turned. Down the hall, I heard Evan's laugh from his phone as a game recap played, and I waited for my name to become a decision again instead of an accommodation. The night labor started. The sky over Aurora showed a thin line of snow. The weather app had called flurries. I timed the first contraction on a sticky note because my phone was across the room. 5 minutes. I exhaled like I learned in class and called Evan. He said he was wrapping something at the office and asked if I could call his mom to confirm. I hung up staring at the verge between drywall and ceiling, where a hairline crack ran like a map. The second contraction didn't leave much air for arguing. I dialed Lorraine anyway. She picked up on the second ring and told me to soak in a warm bath. If it's real, you'll still feel it. I felt it through the porcelain, through the floorboards, through my own teeth. I dressed in fleece and a too-big coat, grabbed my hospital bag, and texted Evan heading in. When I reached the door, his car turned into the driveway. Relief buckled my knees. He took the steps 2 at a time, breath-making white ghosts, and reached for me. I folded forward against him, heat and hurt, and hospital wristband already imagined. Then Lorraine's Mercedes slid in behind his bumper and her heels ticked like metronomes up the walk. Early, she assessed surveying me the way she surveyed balance sheets. Let's hydrate. Hydration can happen at the hospital I managed. She lifted the chain and slipped the deadbolt. Evan hesitated. Something in his face looked 14. Let's just, Mom thinks. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and saw our dining table reflected the one we found on Craigslist, the one we refinished with sandpaper that turned our palms brown. Another contraction tore clean through me. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I hit 911 because the simplest acts can be the bravest. When a room full of people you love refuses to cross a line with you. The siren was a thread in the distance. Lorraine's voice smoothed out. Don't let strangers in. It's late. Mr. Parker's porch camera flashed awake across the street. You okay, Claire? He called Robe, flapping a neighbor on a dark stage, trying to improvise kindness. I'm fine. I lied. And then the EMTs were at the gate, faces open, hands ready. I waved them around the fence because the front door had turned into a thesis about control, and I didn't have time to argue academia. They lifted me. The chain clinked like a bell behind the glass. Evan's shape wavered, then flattened as the door shut. We were moving before I decided to forgive him or not. Pain made the choice for me. It chose what kept us breathing. The ambulance smelled like rubber and winter. A paramedic named Jay clipped a monitor to my finger and told me his sister swore by Dr. Patel. I laughed because belief comes out sideways when you're trying not to break. We slid through intersections, the city turning red to green to red again, and I pressed my palm to where Hazel kicked because touch was the only language we still shared without translation. At St. Luke's, fluorescent light made everything honest. They wheeled me into L&D, and the nurse who took my hand was Tasha Gomez, the same nurse who'd smiled at our tour and said the hall coffee was better on Thursdays. She made eye contact like a promise. You're here. We've got you. Dr. Patel arrived with her hair in a low bun and a question on her face that wasn't accusation, just math. How long I told her about the porch. She nodded once and pressed the Doppler to my belly. Hazel's heartbeat filled the room, fast and purposeful, the sound of a hummingbird that had swallowed a clock. Lorraine got as far as the nurse's station arguing about family rights before Tasha closed my door and asked me who I wanted present. I said Evan. I said no to his mother. My voice shook less than I expected. Tasha put it in the chart and affixed a small sticker to the door, no visitors unless cleared. It felt like a spell I had learned at 30 weeks instead of 3. Evan slipped in later with hospital coffee and eyes that had seen his own reflection and not liked it. He apologized into my shoulder, words thin with shock. I couldn't carry him and a baby at the same time, so I let the apology float and land where it would. When Hazel came, it was a rush and a burn, and then a silence that burst into a cry that cut me clean. Tasha tucked her on my chest. Dr. Patel said I'd done well. I cried because I had, and because the person who should have been first to say it had been staring at a chain. The morning crawled in gray and soft. I watched snow on the window ledge shrink to water and pooled every sound of Hazel's breath into a private reservoir. A hospital social worker stopped by, holding a tablet. She asked if anyone had interfered with my access to care. I told her exactly what happened. Her pen moved without hurry. She said sometimes love dresses up like authority and forgets the oath to do no harm isn't just for doctors. Evan came back from the cafeteria smelling like hash browns. He said he was sorry again, more quietly. I asked him what he would have wanted if he'd been the one on the porch. He couldn't look at me when he said the truth. That night, while Hazel slept in the clear bassinet and monitors blinked like tiny cities, I signed a privacy restriction. Lorraine would not be updated without my consent. When Tasha placed the form on the clipboard, our fingers touched and I had the sudden urge to hug a stranger for knowing what lines are for. When discharge cleared, my sister Mia drove us to our mother's in Lakewood. The living room still had the Afghan we used for forts when storms cut the power. Mia carried Hazel's car seat like a chalice while I navigated the small steps with stitches and a new center of gravity. Mom heated soup and said nothing about Evan because motherhood had already taught her when silence is kinder than commentary. I slept. I fed the baby. I walked to the window and back. In the afternoon, I called a family lawyer whose name the social worker had slipped me on a yellow sticky. He answered on the third ring and asked if I wanted a temporary protection order or just a consultation. My voice found its shape around the word temporary because it's easier to say than forever when you're still bleeding. He said we'd start with safety, then occupancy. I wrote down his name, Elliot Klein, and the time, and then I fed Hazel again because no one has ever won a war on an empty stomach. Back at the townhouse, the sun fell in slices through blinds onto a carpet that still showed the tracks of the painter's ladder. The rocker, my mother's rocker, sat where I'd left it, stubborn and sure. I held Hazel and read aloud the language of the temporary protection order. Elliot drafted no harassment, no interference with medical care, no entry by Lorraine without my consent. When he filed it, he asked if I wanted to seek exclusive temporary occupancy too. The words sounded grand. They meant I could change the locks without becoming the villain in my own story. First Bank printed my new debit card with a mountain range on it. I would set my paycheck to deposit there, and with Elliot's guidance, transferred my half of the joint liquid funds down to the cent from Statements Whitaker Capital, had mailed documents stamped with dates I had already photographed. At the branch, I spoke softly to the manager about a fraud alert on our joint card. Purchases had pinged while I was admitted. She noted my hospitalization and placed a temporary hold pending review. No theatrics, just policy. Evan texted that he wanted to come home. I sent him a photo of the court order and told him to coordinate through Elliot. He typed, "I love you," then deleted it if the 3 dots meant what they always mean. Lorraine called twice and left a voicemail full of measured disappointment. I didn't listen all the way through. Some speeches are carved from the same old stone, no matter how you turn them in the light. I hired a locksmith named Roland, who whistled the theme from a 90s sitcom while he worked. Deputy Hall from the sheriff's office stood by and signed a witness note because Elliot said, "Clean lines make clean outcomes." When Roland tested the deadbolt, the click sounded like punctuation in a paragraph I had struggled to write. I taped a copy of the occupancy order inside the front sidelight and sat down in the rocker. Hazel warm against my chest, the house finally humming in my language. Sleeping babies are time machines. In the 20-minute intervals between feeding and burping, I followed threads. The Whitaker Family Impact Fund filed Form 990s like all charities do. I pulled the public records and found vendor payments that looked like boomerangs, money flying out, labeled shelter renovation, landing in a Whitaker construction subsidiary, then dispersing in fees that kept multiplying like reflections in a mirrored hall. I wasn't out for blood, only daylight. I compiled an email to a reporter at the Denver Ledger, Naomi Brooks, whose columns treated numbers like witnesses. I didn't mention Evan. I attached screenshots, dates highlighted, and asked 3 questions I already knew the answers to, which is a gentle way to open a door. Naomi replied within the hour, not with fireworks, but with a list of documents she planned to pull herself. Her measured tone made me trust her more than any headline. Evan came by for a supervised visit at the Family Connection Center because the order said that's where visits happen right now. Hazel slept through most of it, her mouth making unconscious fish kisses. He stared at her and then at his hands. "I don't know how to fix what happened," he said. I told him fixing wasn't my job. He nodded like a man finally relieved of a chore he never wanted. On the sidewalk afterward, he reached for me and then let his hand drop, and I almost forgave him for that, because restraint can look a lot like growth. Lorraine left a paper-heavy envelope at our door, addressed to Evan, but meant for me. Inside were brochures for Abrams for a nanny agency that charged more per week than my rent for a line of cribs named after Italian lakes. I set the stack beside the trash and realized my anger had cooled into clarity. Rage is a sharp tool. Clarity is a room full of them. Naomi called a few days later. "The numbers don't sing the song the gala program says they do," she said. She asked if I'd go on the record as the person who raised concerns. I stood at the window where the afternoon showed me a sky trying to decide about rain, and said yes, because truth without a name is charity without a ledger. Family court doesn't look like TV. It looks like carpet squares and a tired ficus, and the echo of everything people promised and couldn't deliver. Elliot sat beside me, tie the color of old denim, and slid the flash drive with Mr. Parker's ring footage to the clerk. The judge watched the clip, my breath fogging the porch light, Lorraine's voice through the chain, telling Evan to wait, the EMTs cutting through the backyard like river water finding its bed. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke, which made me think of Dr. Patel. He extended the protection order and granted exclusive occupancy pending mediation. He said something about thresholds and safety that I scribbled down because I wanted to remember the exact way a stranger had described my home. Outside the courtroom, Evan approached with his tie slightly crooked. He looked like a boy who'd found a test waiting on a desk he didn't know he'd have to take. "I'm sorry," he said the 3rd time, but the first time I believed he'd heard himself. I thought keeping the peace was love. "Sometimes it's just silence," I said, not unkindly. Naomi's story ran that afternoon. It wasn't a bomb. It was a blueprint rolled open. She laid out the funds spending the vendors that shared addresses with Whitaker subsidiaries, the renovation line items that ballooned and then vanished. She quoted a former project coordinator who had left after filing internal complaints that went nowhere. She quoted me without turning me into a heroine. I felt both smaller and stronger seeing my name in a paragraph that didn't ask anyone to clap. Lorraine's statement arrived in my inbox within the hour. She called the article misinformed and disappointing. She referred to family matters and smear campaigns. She did not mention the porch. The comments under the Ledger's tweet were a mess of empathy and outrage, and people performing purity. I closed the app and made pasta with jarred sauce because even revolutions deserve dinner. That night, I rocked Hazel beneath the soft hum of the baby monitor and listened for footsteps that did not come. Somewhere, locks were turning that I hadn't touched. Spring in Colorado arrives like a rumor and then a fact. I pushed the stroller along a path that ran behind our row of townhomes and watched Hazel sleep, her fist curled near her chin like a punctuation mark. The rocker had moved into a square of sunlight, the groove under my thumb fitting mine, as if lineage were a kind of map you can carry in your skin. The divorce paperwork read like a story drafted by committee, but the ending was clean. Primary physical custody with a parenting plan that gave Evan time under conditions that felt like care and not punishment. Lorraine stepped down from the fund. The Attorney General's office opened a review I didn't follow like a sports score. I only checked the locks and the calendar and the small signs of a house learning our names again. On a Tuesday, the locksmith returned to rekey the back gate. He handed me 3 brass keys warm from his palm. They chimed together bright and ordinary. I thought about the porch, about sirens pealing the night, about the choice to call for help when help inside the door looked like love, but felt like a test I was destined to fail. I slipped 1 key onto my ring and 1 into a drawer and 1 into the pocket of the diaper bag. Hazel stirred, then settled. In the quiet, I finally understood that the scariest part had never been the chain. It was the apology I kept offering to a threshold that wasn't built for me. When the new lock clicked, the sound was small, almost shy. I exhaled and felt the house exhale with me. Then I went to the kitchen, turned on the light, and began the evening by my own switch. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.